This is a very different context for me. I'm normally presenting at straight-up academic conferences. There's 20 people in the room on a good day. And I sit down at a desk and I read my prepared notes, and then boom, you're done. So this is now I have this like clicker, and there's like a screen in front of me, so I don't have to turn around. This is like science fiction to me. I'm at a TED Talk is what it feels like. So if I get a bit overwhelmed, please forgive me. Also, just advance warning. We heard earlier that you should always like end an email newsletter on an upbeat note so that people are happy. This is like the anti-newsletter. This is like super downbeat, sorry. But we've had a lot of upbeat stuff here, so maybe we need a bit of downbeat stuff too. Let's start off with this. You've seen it. I'm not even the first person here to use this. I write in the paper that maybe the defining feature of journalistic jobs in this time is that there's less of them. There's maybe the same journalistic work that needs to be done, but you can't expect to be paid for it, maybe. And you can't expect necessarily to like get a permanent full-time job. Here's some numbers, maybe you can't see them. They're from a survey of the income of freelance journalists in the UK in 2015. Those little turquoise dudes there on the top, they're the 34% of all freelance journalists who earn less than £10,000 a year. In 2015, the exchange rate was £1 was about $1.50. So 34% of freelance journalists earned less than 15K a year in US dollars. 80% earned less than 60K. It's very hard to make a living of being a journalist. We've heard a lot about like getting multiple revenue streams. That's not just media companies have to do that. If you're an individual journalist, you also have to do multiple revenue streams and find ways to make money on many different things. So basically, journalism is no longer characterized by this kind of framework of stable full-time employment, meaning that in sociological terms, journalism is characterized by increasing precarity. It's precarious work. It's a lot of people have used this term. Perhaps the most well-known is the British sociologist Guy Standing. He published a book in 2011 called The Precariat, the New Dangerous Class, where he talks about like a whole new social class emerging, which is characterized by these insecure working conditions. And I would argue that journalism is now becoming part of that precariat. And a very important element of precarity is that it's not just about sort of material or financial insecurity, but also about how this insecurity makes you think and feel. It like takes over your life. Another term from the sociology of precarity is that it's financial, social, and existential insecurity. You don't know where you're going to get your money from, and you don't know if you're even going to be able to continue to work in the field that you've chosen. And in journalism, we talk a lot about professionalism, and unsurprisingly, precarity has potentially grave consequences for professionalism. Wall of text, boom. I'm not going to read it. You can read it yourselves while I'm talking. Because this is, what is professionalism? Well, it's this kind of collectively shared norms, practices, and codes. If you're a journalist, you share these values that you should do certain things like verification, you should be fair, you should be a watchdog, and so on. Standing and other people who talk about this, talk about precarity, they say that, well, if you work under conditions of precarity, then this is like bad for professionalism. This kind of collective understanding, collectively shared norms and values, they erode if you are sort of constantly insecure in different ways. Standing and others also talk about the role of digitalization and digital technology in exacerbating precarity. Writes that you spend a lot of time online. Could also say that, for example, if you can work on your mobile or on your laptop all the time, anytime, then you're also expected to work on your mobile and laptop all the time, anytime. Like there's a technology gives us a lot of wonderful things, but it also adds pressures, stress. So that's one thing. I was interested in this because Standing is rather vague on how this actually happens in his book. So I've been interested in seeing like how this actually works in the lives of journalists, being a bit more concrete. What have I done? What's the study? This is like, if you're not familiar with academia, this is like the methods slide coming up where I tell you about how I did it, which in an academic conference is the most important slide. Here, you can read it in the paper. I interviewed some people in some countries over a period of time. So I've studied this phenomenon and other things on and off for about a decade now. And I have another project going that's also deals with it. That's still ongoing, so I'm still gathering data. And what I'm going to do next is that I'm just going to put some more walls of text. I'm going to put some quotes from the people that I've talked to up there, because these quotes, I think, illustrate, and they illustrate what I'm talking about, and they're very typical. They're indicative of trends in the data. And I'm going to sort of start with some quotes from the early period where I started gathering data in 2008-9. In this period, young journalists are feeling very much that they have to be entrepreneurial. If you will, entrepreneurial, that's just another word for precarity. That's putting a positive spin on it. It's putting a positive spin on that you have to take individual responsibility for your own career. You have to take individual responsibility for your skills training. You can't expect an employer to take care of you and help you with that, because you might not have an employer, and if you have one, they probably don't have money to spend to train you often. It was also very visible in the material that these young professionals, they were consumed with thoughts about how to get a job, but getting a job was just means to an end. And what was the end? The end was getting the next job. And there you can see clearly, I think, these patterns of thought and habits of thought, how they change. If that's why you want to get a job, so that you can get the next one, what does that do to your understanding of being part of a professional collective and so on? It's like a constant hustle combining these revenue streams, if you will, and that was exhausting to a lot of people. And in this period, a lot of this stress was tied to having to learn new digital skills, new production technologies. It was like an added stress to have to become tech savvy, and at the same time it was necessary, but it was also something that they felt that their employers didn't value really, and it wasn't what they wanted to do. It was like tech skills was often portrayed as being that was not the actual journalism, as you can sort of see here. And some people even you can describe these digital skills as being a kind of meritocracy trap. Like, if you learn these tech skills, then that sort of traps you, then that's all you have to do. It will maybe get you a job, but not the job you want. And I call it a meritocracy trap because most of the people that I talked to had a very strong belief in this idea of meritocracy, which is actually quite deeply rooted in journalism, in this professional culture that sort of, if you're just good, then you will get a job. And if you don't get a job, that must mean that you're bad, right? So it's in itself, it's a word or an idea that places a huge responsibility on the individual. And then flash forward to 2017, the period that we're in now, where I started doing interviews. Here's maybe a bit more positive spin, like digital skills are more they're more natural for journalists. It was 10 years, it was pretty quick. They're transferable, so you can use them to do other jobs. This contributes to what I call non-exclusivity, like journalism is not an exclusive occupation anymore. I mean exclusive in the sense that you do it exclusive of other things. But now you might have to work as a journalist for one day and then you write ad copy the next day or you do something else another day. And these digital skills are what they sort of empower you because you can work in a lot of different things, but not necessarily journalism. So to sort of sum up a bit, 10 years of research, here are 4 key takeaways. I found that journalists are increasingly what I call primed for precarity. If you're sort of like a J school graduate going out looking for jobs, you expect it to be this way. You expect that you will have to work for free or almost nothing at entry level in order to get in. And it's natural that it should be this way. Those of you who are like a bit older maybe remember that there was a time when you could get jobs and it wasn't this way. And interestingly, like what I call a reversed view of these digital skills. In 2008-09, it was what allowed you to enter the profession. In 2017, they're part of what allows you to leave. Great, I've learned these digital things. Now I can go work in PR and actually get paid and be able to like raise a family and stuff. Since I studied many different countries, I feel I also have to say something about the comparative points. And an obvious one, a lot of how this sort of manifests for people has to do with employment regimes. So in countries like Sweden, Germany, and also Italy, which has like strong labor protections, labor law, social welfare systems, journalists, like other people, they're shielded from the worst of this precarity. Yeah? Whereas in Eastern Europe, which I've studied a lot, where journalists essentially never expected to have an easy ride because the media industry never consolidated post 1991 in the same way that it has done elsewhere. Then it's sort of, they're less bothered by it because they didn't expect it to begin with. And so I've written here, so since we are in the US now, from what I know about the US, it's likely to be much more like Eastern Europe, like a relatively sort of weak employment regime here and sort of weak welfare system. And precarity also prevents collective solutions. If it's like getting a job, it's dog eat dog, and all the responsibility is on the individual, then it's very hard to think about these collective things, collective norms, values. One thing that I was thinking when I was interviewing sort of younger journalists, like none of them talk about or mention mentors. Where are the sort of older professionals helping them? There's no context. It's very hard to do that in the current context. So to end, even maybe a bit ahead of time, I think maybe the most depressing takeaway is, but seriously, is that if journalism can only be practiced by the people who can afford to work for free, then what kind of journalism do we get? Thank you.